German involvement in education in Cameroon. The German colonial administration in Cameroon began in 1884. Following the Germano-Douala Treaty of 12th July 1884, where King Bell, King Akwa, and some of their subordinates signed for Cameroon, while Edward Schmidt, Adolph Woermann, and Johannes Voss signed for Germany. The hoisting of the German flag on July 14th and appointment of Dr. Max Buchner as imperial representative ushered in the beginning of German administration in Cameroon, which affected practically all areas of life, particularly that of education. Before German annexation of Cameroon, formal education was in the hands of missionary societies. In 1844, Joseph Merrick, a West Indian of freed slave descent, serving the English Baptist Missionary Society, opened the first school in Bimbia on the Cameroon coast. Later in 1845, Alfred Secker, an English missionary of the same mission, opened the second school in Douala. Subsequently, these missionary societies opened many more schools along the Cameroon coast. After German annexation of Cameroon, the German government replaced the English Missionary Society with the Basel Mission. Other missionary societies that accepted German terms were allowed to continue to operate and provide education in the territory. This included the American Presbyterian Mission, the Palatine Catholic Mission, and the German Baptist Mission. These missionary societies determined the educational policy until 1910. The German education policy in Cameroon was greatly delayed by resistance to German rule in Cameroon. These resistances preoccupied the administrators for almost two of their three-decade rule. Also, during this period, the colonial administration was surveying the economic wealth of the territory and settling frontier limits with other colonizing powers such as Britain in the west and France in the east and south. Therefore, the missionary societies almost single-handedly sponsored education in Cameroon without any significant German colonial intervention. The first German colonial government teacher, Theodor Christaller, was employed in 1887, and he opened the first government school in February 1887 in Douala, receiving a financial grant of 2,500 marks that year from King Williams II of Germany. Christaller spent that year studying the Douala language, and by 1888, he was able to produce a book of local stories from which he could teach in the Douala language. Working in collaboration with two other Germans, Betz and Kobele, he produced a common curriculum for Cameroon and Togoland. The curriculum comprised a 5-year course with special attention given to the teaching of the German language, especially in government schools. Also, he proposed the establishment of a library in Douala to enable graduates continue their education. There is great possibility so much more would have been achieved by Christaller to improve German colonial education if he did not die in 1896. The death of Theodor Christaller slowed down the government intervention in education until 1907, when Governor Setz called for the first ever conference for education in Cameroon. This conference had as participants representatives of missionary societies, the German colonial administrators, and business people. The discussions encompassed a range of educational problems, including the curriculum, the language of instruction, collaborations between the missions and the government, financing of education, school age, school attendance and discipline, as well as vocational education. The publishing of an ordinance bearing the resolutions of the 1907 Conference for Education on the 25th of April 1910 established government control over all formal education in Cameroon. The ordinance became the first legal agreement between government and missions for utilizing the institutional structure of missions to implement government educational policy in Cameroon. It saw the commencement of government financing of those mission schools that satisfied government regulations, and also the first major attempt to interfere with the school curricula. It also imposed the German language in all schools receiving the government subventions. The 1910 ordinance placed all educational establishments under the authority of the governor and henceforth ended mission authority in matters of education. The objectives of the German education policy in Cameroon, amongst others, were as follows. Firstly, the extension of colonial authority by the missions. This extension resulted in the setting up of several missions serving the interest of the Germans. These missions were entrusted with the heavy task of dealing with educational affairs. Some of these missions were the Protestant or the Basel missions in Buea, located in Douala and in the northwest, which created stations and employed European missionaries. This mission was a commercial enterprise with factories. This mission even went so far as to lend money to Cameroonians. As for the Catholic mission installed in Douala and other areas, it was made up of the Pallottine fathers, in which majority were Germans. They settled inside the mainland because for them, this area was more paying than that of the coast. As for the Baptist mission, they were located in Douala and in the center. They arrived the territory after the Basel mission, but however, created multiple stations in the years prior to German annexation. Their members consisted of natives and school children. The second objective for the German educational policy in Cameroon was the spread of the German language. In the territory, especially before 1884, the local languages and Pidgin English language were the most practiced or spoken. The colonial authority took more effective measures in order to facilitate the spread of the German language in Cameroon. In April 1910, a law on education was promulgated, and Article 2 stipulated that, with the exception of German, no other language should be taught or used as a medium for instruction. For a good broadcasting of the German language, they will create school curricula for missionary schools. This curricula will have one objective: to get the mainstream of the population to speak German. The German government went as far as subsidizing the missions to spread the German language and the culture. A third objective was the search for translators. When the Germans arrived in Douala, they realized that the population was made up of natives drawn from different ethnic compositions. To them, it was necessary to train elites or translators capable of facilitating communication between the colonizers and the natives in order to rapidly extend their colonial policy. For a good training, the Germans decided to send some distinguished Cameroonians to pursue higher education in Germany so as to become promoters of German language, culture, and good translators. Most of the students sent to study in Germany came from the south of Cameroon. Among those sent to Germany were Alfred Bell, Pondo Akwa, Rudolf Douala Mangabel, Martin Paul Samba, and Charles Atangana, who left as a teacher of Ewondo at the Hamburg Colonial Institute. The fourth objective of the German colonial education in Cameroon was the exclusion of the Pidgin English language. While trying to establish the German language, the Germans wanted to eradicate the Pidgin English language in Cameroon at all costs, given that it was the most widely spoken language, the most widely used mode of communication, especially around the coast. This Pidgin English language was used by traders, natives, planters, and even civil servants. In 1913, the governor Karl Ebemer denounced in a circular the use of pidgin English words in the German language, in conversations, and even in writings. To further eradicate pidgin English, the governor instructed his officials to stop the use of pidgin English in their daily relations with the natives. In this regard, the government introduced German for all subjects and finally absorbed the pidgin English. The following are the characteristics of the German educational system in Cameroon. Firstly, the language of instruction. The most striking feature of German colonial policy in terms of pedagogy was the language of instruction. In public schools, German language predominated, but its preponderance was exclusive during the beginning. A German instructor by name Christaller set himself the goal of learning the Douala language first, in order to prepare for his pupils a textbook manual for the teaching of the German grammar. Since the duration of the primary course was not sufficient enough to acquire a good mastery of German language, 2 additional courses were created for the purpose of improvement. In this connection, the German administration stated that the use of pidgin by civil servants was a national crime and obliged them to use only German in their dealings with people. The second characteristic is the curriculum. The curriculum content in government primary schools focused primarily on the subjects as follows: Allemand, observation, calcul, geography, history, and the natural science. As the table shows, during the first and second years, students were taught reading, writing, drawing, songs, patriotic poems, geometry, technical and agriculture were also taught at the Buea State Technical School and the Victoria Agricultural School. However, the German language became the main instruction language from the 3rd year onward, in line with the applications of the school law of 1910. In addition, the advent on the teaching of technical and agricultural programs was part of the German government's concern to train future staff or collaborators who will serve them in their different domains. It should be noted that training was divided into study programs. The program of studies. Primarily in this system, there were 3 programs of studies, which were annual, weekly, and daily. But these programs changed from private to public schools. The public primary course was initially restricted to 3 years until 1897, and then extended to 4 years in 1903 to 1904. 2 years later, a seed year was created called Improvement. Here, the author of the Colonial Bulletin states that the timetable for the seed class corresponds to that of primary schools in Germany. Concerning attendance and the educational contribution, majority of the administrative reports conclude that general attendance was good. However, the assertion provided by the various missions remains doubtful and contradicting, especially where they talk of irregular and very irregular attendance. The decree of 1910, which instituted a certain compulsory education for registered pupils, recognizes the extent of absenteeism in the classes. On the other hand, there seemed to be no difficulty in recruiting. The official school in Douala was to reject candidates from 1896 who were less than 10 years after the American Presbyterian mission, pointing out that these students, many escaped from their parents, especially in the Bulu region, who loved going to school. Concerning boarding and vocational schools, A large proportion of students from mission schools were interns. Out of 1,113 children in 1905 to 1906, the Presbyterian mission counted 800 interns. Catholic and Protestant missions had many boarding schools, but they welcomed especially the best students of the environment and especially the girls. For the complementary level, there was high restriction on admission at this level. If one ignored the aborted attempt of 1906, public education counts only two in 1912 to 1913. The Baylor Mission still maintained 10 establishments of this type in 1903 to 1904 and trained 455 of its 5,025 students. It had already created a higher school at Bonaberry in 1894 and Liberthal in 1899, and the following year, 3 schools for boys and 2 German schools. The Catholic and Presbyterian missions were not exception in the establishment of seminaries for similar improvement. Concerning agricultural and technical education, far from being neglected, technical education in all proportion was taken seriously by the various educators during the German reign. In 1910, a school for agriculture in Victoria and an official technical school in Buea appeared under the sponsorship of the German government. This creation was intended to provide to the administration the training of technical staff, which were regularly sent in small number to acquire practical training in Europe. Concerning assessment and evaluation, both an oral and written examination sanctioned the completion of the initial studies. Given the relative absence among official candidates and the large number of receipts among private education candidates, the level of such candidates was not excessively high. The lack of German training could normally have led to a considerable desecration. Also, the teaching body was composed of European teachers assisted by natives to make suitable results. Now talking about the impact of the German educational system in Cameroon, firstly, we talk about the training of elites. In this sphere, many elites were educated as they were taught how to read, write, count, and were equally initiated to biblical values. Secondly, the awakening of a nationalistic feeling. The institution of the school in Cameroon contributed unwittingly to a sense of self-affirmation. Some of them had the privilege of going to Germany to continue their studies and became elites, such as Charles Atangana, who even taught Ewondo to the Germans. Beside all this, it became relevant for those elites, especially the Douala king, to multiply this nationalistic doctrine to the people living in the hinterland of Cameroon in order to get rid of the German colonial system. The third impact was the phenomenon of acculturation. The encounter between two cultures hardly operates in total cohesion, and this is because one would seem to dominate the other. The case of German and Cameroon did not escape this reality. All the more, it was a relationship of subjugation with the German administration. Worse still, the advent of new forms of school led by the missionaries and under the auspices of the German colonial administration brought most of the indigenous practices to an end. In fact, the promotion of the German language as a means of teaching and communication contributed adversely in the promotion of the local language. A very significant impact of German education in Cameroon is colonial inheritance. In the field of education, academic infrastructural institutions were principally established by the missionary societies on the territory. In fact, the Basel Mission built several schools in Douala, Buea, Victoria, Eseka, and Fumban. The American Presbyterian Mission created several schools, among others, the Ebot in 1895, Lolodorf in 1897, Elad in 1901, and Melet Fulasi in 1916, just to name a few. On the other hand, the Catholic mission of the Palutin Fathers founded Bojongo, Sase, Chang, Bamenda, and Bota during the German period. On their part, the German left several educated elites and institutions in the territory. Several worthy features were formed. The German language was restored as a linguistic heritage on the territory. Conclusively, the German colonial administration in Cameroon came to an end in 1916, following the defeat of the Germans at the First World War. Despite challenges faced, such as physical constraints and sociocultural constraints, it would not be an overstatement to say that the German colonial education system, especially through missions, had impacted the lifestyle of the people of Cameroon. It is clear that the Germans had set up a policy of extending their colonial authority by the missionaries, which encouraged the expansion of the German language with the constructions of schools on the territory, for the most part done by the missions. From the beginning, the German colonial authorities had as main objective to have the entire control of the territory. As they went on, the idea of eradicating all what is not German or which could play against their colonial regime became vital. It is in this sphere that the German administration decided to put an end to the existing commercial Pidgin English language that had existed in this area long ago thanks to the Portuguese. As if that was not enough, the local Douala language did not properly work in public places such as markets, administrative services, and schools. This was a result of some decrees enacted and ratified by the German colonial authorities as time went on. Nevertheless, this colonial education system had an enormous impact on the Cameroonians insofar as they attended the schools. This educational system during the German reign accelerated elite formation, a nationalistic spirit, and a hope to belong to the same fatherland. This was because the German colonialists were the first to bring all Cameroonians under a single administrative unit. However, despite the hurtful effects of the German colonial system, especially in the domain of education, it went a long way in the acculturation and equally participated in the awakening of Cameroonians, especially the coastal chiefs in their territory. Thank you for listening.